I've mentioned before that when I was in high school, my brother started memorizing Bible verses, and so it got me to start just because I wanted to do it better than him and memorize more than him. And I think it was one time I just Googled, like starting off, I Googled what are the top 10 Bible verses to memorize. That's how I got underway with memorizing Bible verses, and within those 10 verses that Google spit it out at me, one of them was Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. That is, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. It's not uncommon to find t-shirts or mugs that have Proverbs 3:5 on it. Trust is the very core of the spiritual life. To live in peace, I need to have trust. To not be anxious, trust. We talked about last week about getting this vertical piece right with God. To be in relationship with God, one needs trust. And then I can get this piece right, the horizontal part of going deep in relationship with others. Trust is absolutely necessary. But trust is incredibly hard. If we're just, maybe to be honest for a minute and not pretend that we're holier than thou, it is super hard to trust God when we don't understand, when it's rough. Life isn't short of hardships and trials. There's a line in Shakespeare's Macbeth that kind of hits it right to the core. It says this: each new morn, new widows howl, new orphans cry, new sorrows strike heaven on the face. That's just to point to the reality that every morning there are thousands, if not millions of people that wake up and are experiencing life-shattering losses and hardships. It is incredibly hard to trust when that is going on. And it's not just that, but it's also little stuff where there is no one big life-shattering thing, but also when a whole bunch of little things are adding up and then it's heavy, that too, it becomes incredibly hard to trust. And so real quick, looking at the first reading in 1 Kings chapter 17, where Elijah is in the midst of a famine. He's in one of those rough spots, tough spots. We want to look at, just draw two nuggets from there to help us to trust. And maybe this homily this morning is especially for those of us who might be in the midst of a famine. Famine has struck you. And you're in a rough spot where you're finding it especially difficult to trust right now with this or that I'm facing, and uncertainty. I'm not sure how this is going to play out. We hear that we need to just take the next step. And then secondly, the trust needs to be radical. So first, the next step. A quick summary, right? We're thrown into the middle of 1 Kings chapter 17. We got to know what's going on. There is a famine that has taken place. God has told Elijah to go out east so as to survive the famine, head east of the Jordan River, and there God will provide for him. He says, I'll provide for you there. Go near this stream and settle there at this stream, and I'll provide for you. And I'm actually going to bring ravens are going to come to you and nourish you with food. And so Elijah gets there, he drinks from the stream, and he gets there and he drinks from the stream. He's receiving nourishment from the ravens. And what happens? The stream dries up. The very place that God told him to go to, the stream then, and to receive water from, that dries up. And then God comes and tells Elijah, now I want you to go from here and head to Zarephath. And then when you get there, then you're going to find a widow. And then I want you to ask the widow to give you drink and food. Elijah goes. Next step, he goes, he gets there, he finds the widow. He says, please bring me some drink, some food. And we hear that played out in our first reading. We'll get back to that in a second, but just pause. See that Elijah's in a rough spot. Famine has struck him. He's uncertain. He's scared. He's not sure how it's going to play out. But see how that God is guiding him and asking him just to take the next step. He only knows what the next step is. Elijah would have loved to seen the whole picture, to see like what it's going to look like at the end, and to say like how is it all going to play out, and he would have loved to have seen that. Imagine Elijah when he gets to the spot that God tells him to go. He gets to the stream. Imagine what's going through his head as he's there, he's drinking the water, and then the next day, and the next day, and then the water is getting lower and lower and lower to the point where then the water is completely dry. It would have been really helpful at that point for Elijah to know the whole picture. But God is saying, take the next step. I know you want to see the whole thing. Take the next step. We want to see the whole picture, don't we? Wouldn't it be incredibly easier and calming for us maybe to see the whole picture, especially when famine strikes, especially when we have something where it's like rough? We find ourselves asking ourselves, how am I going to get through this? Am I going to get through this? I don't know what the outcome's going to be, and I'm scared. And he just says, trust me. I know it might not make sense right now, and you're not going to understand it. I know you want to see the whole plan, but right now I'm asking you just to go by this stream and drink. There's going to be water there. Drink. He doesn't tell him that it's going to dry up. He's going to tell him about the widow or anything. He just says, go to the stream. It does end up drying up. And God tells him again, now here's the next step in guiding and trusting him. It's difficult, incredibly difficult, but you see how God is drawing Elijah, and in the midst of this, he draws you and I, especially when we're in times of famine, to a deeper dependence, deeper relationship, a deeper love. He's drawing us in. Second thing we see, the Lord's asking for radical trust. That just regular old trust, if you will, it's not enough. He demands a radical trust. Christianity demands a radical trust, and we see this. Elijah's following through. He's following the steps, if you will, the brook, and receiving water from the stream. He finds the widow. He asks for bread and water, and listen how the widow responds. Verse 12. She says, there's only a handful of flour in my jar, and only a little oil in my jug. I was preparing, I had these sticks here, and I'm literally preparing something for myself and my son. When we've eaten this, then we'll die. Famine has struck in her as well, and her son, her family. And so she's literally preparing the last meal for her and her son before they're going to die. And Elijah responds, do not fear. Go make food with what you have for me. The jar of flour will not go empty, nor the jug of oil run dry. That is radical trust. It's actually Elijah like having some nerve to tell the widow who's preparing her last meal for her son to know, feed me first. And I promise you, God has told me the oil's not going to run dry. The flour won't go empty. If I asked right now a show of hands, like who would say, like raise your hand if you would say you trust God. Don't raise your hand. Ready to say, raise your hand if you trust God. I'm saying don't raise your hand, right? Because I'm telling you what would happen. The majority, if not most, everybody in this church would say, without much thought, I'd raise my hand and I'd say, I trust God. But in reality, how many of us really do? And to what extent? One of the graces, I haven't shared too much about the graces yet on my 8-day silent retreat. But one of the graces on that 8-day silent retreat now a couple months ago was that the Lord showed me something in an area about something that I didn't fully trust him. Actually, I didn't trust him at all. It was like I wanted this to happen so much, and I had so set in my mind, like if this, of course this is going to happen. Of course it would make no sense for this not to happen. But he showed me is that I wasn't trusting, I was trying to control so much of the reins here. And him saying, you don't trust me here. Something in me had to die in order for me to get to that spot. A meditation or a prayer experience you might consider doing is to ask Jesus, or have him ask you, because he does ask, would you be able to trust me if I allowed X to happen? It's like beyond the thought, like, oh no way God would ever allow this to happen. Would you trust me if I allowed this to happen? For some of us, it might be like a death of a spouse or death of a child. Listen, even God's permissive will, there's God's actual will, but we know that God is not the cause of evil, but he still would allow, his permissive will still allows something to happen. Because he's all powerful, all knowing, and all loving. That's radical trust. It's crazy trust. But it's demanded. It's demanded. And that's where we can identify the tight reins that we have on some spots and control that's causing us to be interiorly kind of messed up a little bit. And it oftentimes identifies idols as well. But it's radical trust. Blessed Kiara, we put it up in the school or on the way to school for our religious education and school children to see. Kiara was a young Italian girl. She died in 1990, and she battled from a rare form of bone cancer. And she was a young woman who had remarkable faith. Just a joyful 17-year-old young woman who was just full of life and deep faith. And the bone cancer caused incredible pain and suffering. And she had a deep desire to live. Make no mistake. And as she kept getting sicker and the pain and suffering kept getting more and more intense, and as her body's literally shutting down, her mother would oftentimes hear this now 18-year-old young woman say under her breath, "If you want it, Jesus, so do I. If you want it, Jesus, so do I." That's radical trust. That's knowing that God is trustworthy, that he's faithful, that he's good, that he's a good father. Can we say that? Can you say, "If you want it, Jesus, so do I"? See, that's when we start getting into Proverbs 3:5 territory. That's why the Google would spit it out as the top one, maybe the top 10 Bible verses to memorize. To trust God with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. We're getting into territory that's out of understanding. I don't get it. I don't like it. I don't understand it at all. I'd rather it not be the case. I'd like to see the whole picture. Let me see everything. That's Proverbs 3:5 territory. Let me just close with this. The only way we can get there, the only way we can get in that spot is looking to the cross. Because we are sinners and we have mistrust in us. The original sin of Adam and Eve in the garden, the fall, the root of it was a distrust of God, that he's not good, that he doesn't care, that he's not really looking out, that he's kind of out to get me. That was in the first fall, that was in the fall, the original sin, and it's at the root of every single sin is a distrust of God. We have distrust in us of God. God sent his son Jesus to die for us on the cross to deal with that. But he goes to the cross to prove to us, I love you, you can trust me. I love you, you can trust me. When we look at the cross, we can say no matter what happens to me, even though I want to see the whole picture and I'm not seeing the whole picture and it's just the next step, I don't like it, I don't want this radical trust. Jesus, I trust you, and please that we get to the grace one day to have the response of a living saint like Blessed Chiara. If you want it, Jesus, so do I.